everyone, it's Lucas. Thanks so much for checking out my video. Today I'm going to be doing an Ableton Warp tutorial. It's going to follow up on another more basic video that I did in the past. So I got a lot of questions about how to warp stuff that is not synced to any particular tempo, and also how to sync up stems and things that people send you to an existing project tempo that you're working on. So we're going to tackle both of those things today. As always, let me know what you guys think in the comments if this is helpful or not, so I can keep making better videos. And I try to respond to everything, especially if people have questions and technical things, but I may not be able to get to every single person's comment or question if you have a really specific issue. So feel free to hit me up on my website and book a lesson or something like that. So I'd love to help you out. But for right now, what I did basically is I recorded. So I wanted to simulate kind of what it would be like to work on a songwriting session, which this has happened to me numerous times in the past, where someone sends me like a voice memo or something of guitar that's not synced up to anything, and they're like, let's just use this in the song. So that's a warping task that I tried to simulate. So I just have like a pretty janky guitar recording right here that's not synced up, and I also recorded some drums that I played myself that's really janky, as well as some hi-hats. So we're gonna get all those lined up. So my workflow for this right now is, so here's what the guitar sounds like. And my workflow is really, I'm going to start with the guitar because I think that's the main aspect of the song that I want to line everything up to. So we're going to start there. So check out what it sounds like, and then I'll walk you through my workflow. And everything here is unwarped right now, so it's really important. We want to start unwarped to begin with, and I'll show you exactly why. So you get the idea. There's our guitar part. This should be fairly straightforward. The absolute first step before we do anything, besides making sure that it's unwarped, is actually to drag our start marker to exactly where the music starts, where you want your beat 1 to happen. And you can be very, very precise, but sometimes this can be a little tricky. Like if it's strums and things like that, it may actually start earlier than beat 1. But the stuff that I recorded for this example, I just wanted to kind of keep it simple so it's not a super complicated task, because warping can definitely get pretty intensive. It just takes some experience to get better at it. But right now, we're just, for the sake of the tutorial, this starts right on 1. So that's where I line this up. And here's my drums, recorded completely at an arbitrary tempo, and it's not even a good recording either. So that is, so I'm gonna just kind of get the start point set up for that, and same thing for these hi-hats. So it's super helpful if we have everything starting at the correct spot. Otherwise, it's very, very hard to warp. So that's the first step. And also setting the end markers is very key as well. For this particular situation though, I just recorded, I believe, like a couple of bars. So I'm not going to mess with the end marker right now, but if you're warping, let's say like a whole song or a loop or something, make sure you got your start and your end right. So actually count the amount of bars that is in the piece of music and get the start and the end to be lined up where you want to work with, so that the amount of musical content is what you're working with, so to speak. So we'll get more into that in a second. You'll see what I mean. So one thing that I just wanted to illustrate before I get into anything is one concept that is a little bit tricky to understand at first, and this applies to any recording software. This is just like a music recording concept for digital audio workstations. Is we don't have any of these audio files warping. So look at what happens when I change the grid. This is a little deceptive because it looks like the audio files are getting shorter and longer, but actually what's happening is the audio files are staying the same when warp is not checked. What you're actually changing is the ruler, so that the defined amount of space between bars and beats and bars, and also like seconds, is actually changing. But the visual representation of that is a little deceptive because it looks like the audio files are shrinking as I go down, and they're expanding as I increase the tempo. But that's really not the case. The audio is actually staying exactly the same, but you're just changing the grid when it's unwarped. But if I check warp, what happens is when you change the tempo, that one that's warped stays exactly the same because it's locked in. So it's an important concept to grasp, and it's a little confusing. So you're going to have to mess around with it a little bit until your brain kind of gets how that works. So what I'm going to do real quick is I'm just kind of going to get a rough idea of the tempo by tapping it in. So I'm hearing so I'm going to tap we'll do something around 96, right? So this hasn't been clocked to a tempo, so we're gonna sort of set the tempo by using this guitar part as a reference. So 96 seems close enough. I'll turn on the click and see what that sounds like. So it's actually way faster. 115. We'll work with that. 115 seems fine for now. So as you can see, it's pretty off, but it's not too bad actually. It's really close to it. So that will vary depending on the musicians and content that you're working with. So when I hit warp, it says, would you like to keep the current time in the clips? And we're gonna hit yes. So that comes up because I had warped it before and it was asking if it wanted me to restore the warp markers from before. If you have it checked in the settings that you want everything to automatically warp after you record it, it's going to be warped. So you're going to have to turn it off and then back on again. But if you don't have that checked, it's going to be off. So that's totally up to you. There's different warp modes. I'm not going to explain every single one for the purpose of this video because it's just going to get way too long. But for the most part, I really like using Complex and Complex Pro. So I'm going to go with Complex for this guitar. And there's plenty of information on that online, by the way. So check out the Ableton manual, and there's a lot of videos too. So these little symbols here are essentially suggesting to you where warp markers should go. Like those are basically the transient indicators, and a transient is basically just like a really big spike in amplitude. So like the transients, like the beginning of the drum hit, the beginning of the guitar hit. So what I found is that, in a lot of videos that I watched, people would suggest doing Command A, which is select all, and just inserting warp markers. But I find that to be very not helpful for my workflow because I can't necessarily trust that Ableton or any DAW is going to accurately figure out where the actual beats need to be in the music. Like, sure, it can find the transient, but is the transient exactly where we want the guitar to line up? That's questionable. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to visually, I know that these guitar plucks happen right here. So I'm going to automatically just double click on these and assign them. And keep in mind, it may not be perfect. So like, look at this. It's not even really perfectly on. It's a start, but you may literally need to zoom in and assign your own by just double clicking over there. Sometimes, actually very frequently, it's totally off. So you can't trust the computer to really interpolate, or like the computer won't be 100% right. That's why we need to use our ears to figure this out. So I'm going to do the big ones first and just sort of trust that these are going to gradually snap into place on their own, but we're going to have to edit the small ones. So I know from listening to this that these big hits are supposed to be on the downbeat. So they're on the 1, the 2, the 3, and the 4, like that. So I'm going to drag this back, and I'm going to drag this back, and we're just going to kind of get all these main hits lined up. So the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to trim the end. Because I recorded this, I know that I did a reasonable amount of bars, but if you get a piece of music from someone else, it might be really long. You're gonna have to trim the end part. So let's listen to that and see what else we need to do. So some of these little ones are off here, so you can go in and do micro adjustments. So look right here, this is what I was talking about. This is not perfectly on. So if this is too far, what I like to do is actually you can hold down Option, and it will allow you to edit free from the grid. So I click and then hold Option on Mac, and I can get that there. So that's not quite right, but we're gonna get it better here. And also I will sort of preemptively just kind of fill these in, because the thing is, let's say I move this one, it's also going to move everything to the right and even to the left of it too, like if I don't have that checked. So if you're going to be doing fine adjustments, it's a safe move to just enable all the warp markers on any musical information that you think really needs to stay in place. I'm okay with this being a little bit behind the bar just for the sake of groove. And let's just get these here. This looks like it could be back. And we should be pretty close. So this is a pretty straightforward example, but this may or may not take more time depending on the source material that you have. So I'm holding down Option again just to kind of slide that, because the transient marker is not quite right. You could also just get rid of this marker and add your own, but it's a little faster for me. This one also, can get that here. I'm actually really just doing this visually because I've done it so many times. Well, I mean visually and, you know, orally, either way, you can use both to get great results. But if you can see it, you can also verify that it's lining up right. So use your ears and your eyes. Cool, so now this is ready to be looped. Command L, and that'll loop nicely. And now we can change the tempo freely. So if I feel like this is too fast for the song, we can just bump it down. I thought 115 was fine. If anything, maybe I'll speed it up a little bit. 120. I mean, we can do whatever tempo, and once we warp all these, it should be, you know, Ableton's warping is amazing, so it's one of the main reasons why I use it. But let's move on to the drums now. So these, we lined up the beginning, so let's just drag it into the piece of music and see how terrible it is. So it's totally off, it's completely unlistenable. So let's warp this, hit yes, and the first thing that I'm gonna do is, in my mind, let me just mute the drums and let me just think in my head about what this is supposed to sound like. So we kind of want like kick, snare, kick, kick, snare. Like the snare was 1, 2, 3, 4. The snares are on 3. So we need to line that up as such. So I'll mute the guitar just for the sake of not having to listen to that mess. So this snare needs to be on 3. So I'm going to create a marker and drag that back. And the nice thing about it is it drags everything to the right back too, which may or may not help us, but we're about to see. And we know that these kicks need to be on 2 as well. So this takes some musical experience to sort of envision what it's supposed to sound like at first. But either way, what you need to do, the process is basically the same. Create your warp markers where the transients are, and drag them in until it sounds good. So how quickly you're able to do that requires some experience. But right now I'm just thinking for this drum beat, we want the snare to hit on 3. So these big snare hits, I'm gonna make sure they're all on 3 right now. And as you can see, I ran out of music here, so I'm gonna drag this back and just keep doing what I was doing. It sounds very audibly warped. We can go on beats mode for drums, but I don't know if that will help, but we'll see. Okay, so I'm gonna go in and fine tune it. It's not great. I'm warping this more than what I would normally want to warp something. It just has artifacts and stuff, but for the purposes of this demo, I think this is a good example. And it certainly sounds better than what it would sound like if it was warped in another DAW, so we'll rock with that. Right now what I'm doing is I'm just grabbing some of these ones that are a little out of time. It's okay if it's not 100% perfect. We want it to be human, but here we go. Like these are obviously kind of wrong. I want these to be, you know, put the transient marker right there, and I want it to be farther behind. There's some noises and things that we would want to edit out with the guitar. Was a little off. You could hear it. Normally we'd have kick and snare on 2 different tracks, but I figured for this demo it would be great to have just like a pretty janky drum loop. And now we will add the hi-hats in. So these are going to be totally out of time, so I'm not even going to bother listening to all of it together. I'm just going to listen to the hi-hat track by itself and just get a feel for what we're going to need to do. It's at a totally different tempo. So one thing that you will get a little bit better at over time is actually just kind of visualizing how this is supposed to line up over the grid and how it's off right now. So one thing I'm realizing is that if this hi-hat performance is a given number of bars, we can see right here that it is being played much faster than what the tempo is of this whole song, because this ends earlier. So this whole situation needs to be dragged out to be snapped to the grid. So you kind of get a sense for that over time the more you do this. And you will also get a sense just orally from hearing these types of things, you know, the tempo is too fast or it's too slow. It takes some experience. So we're going to hit warp and hit yes. So if we listen to this, I'm going to turn the click off. So the way that the hi-hats should be is, you know, just really 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So I'm assuming that we'd want these to line up on the 2s and the 3s, the way that that's marked, with the ones that are being emphasized on the downbeats. This may be different depending on whatever it is you're working on, but for this type of thing, I actually don't mind having the rest of the audio being dragged backwards, because I know that this needs to be stretched out that way, this way. So that's why I'm not warping everything all at once. Some tutorials might have you do this, like I was explaining earlier, and insert all the warp marks, but then once I move this, nothing else is going to be affected. So you may need to do it that way for a particular different example, but for this, I'm going to actually just do it manually. So let's hear that with the click. Yeah, so this needs a lot of work. So I'm just listening to the accents and inferring what the downbeat is supposed to be. So we have like 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 E and 2, you know, so. Although I wasn't even counting that perfectly, but you get the idea. I'm going to start it from closer. And once again, we need this to go all the way to 9. So. And this is a mess over here, so what I'll do is I'll zoom in. So we have 1 E and 2 E, and I know this seems ridiculous, but this is way more warping than what I would normally want to do. Like, you can hear it's pretty. We could mess with the different modes and see what sounds the best, but it's pretty bad. So, you know, it's funny. I was actually just thinking this is more warped than what I would like, but sometimes it gives it a vibe. I've definitely heard some pop songs that have pretty audible warping going on. Kind of just make it unique, even if it's janky. But, you know, depending on the type of music you're making, it might be undesirable. So let's hear everything together. So as you can see, my method from doing this particular project right here is that I've been getting the big main downbeats because it's helped sort of spread out the audio file to where it's close to where it needs to be, and then I go in and fill all the little subdivisions like I'm doing right now to get the little eighth note timings perfectly lined up like these right here. So I got the big hits just to get the general gist of it, and now we really got to go in and get the individual timing, because it's pretty obvious that it's off, but at least the audio file is the length that it's meant to be. So one step at a time we get this closer. It takes some time. The computer will not do it for you automatically. So I'm just going to go ahead and do these. I want you guys to see everything. And by the way, I'm going to post this whole Ableton session on my website for free that you can just download so you can practice. If you need something to do it, it'll be exactly like it was before Unwarped. And here's what it sounds like. Let's see how close we are. So I noticed a couple little details that we could smooth out. So, when you have multi-tracks drums, you want to make sure that these are lined up correctly. Like some of the hi-hats are, when you have multiple tracks of drums is what I mean, like a hi-hat on a separate track, you want to make sure that they're hitting at the right time. But that's pretty much the gist of it. So this is the process for number one, lining up stems that you get that are not at a tempo or not at the correct tempo. And number two is once you have a tempo established in your song, you can line up other stems to that regardless of whether or not you know what tempo they are. So in this particular example, we didn't know what the tempos were because it was just a janky recording. And once we have all this synced up, we can actually continue warping. So now that everything's warped, you see it stays the same when I up the tempo. So if we wanted to do this at 165, similarly, we can actually change the pitch of this too. If the singer wants to do it in a different key, let's say we go up 3 semitones. And we're in business here. So let me know if this was helpful. Go download the files for free on my website. So the link's in the description for that. And on my website too, if you want lessons or anything like that, or just help with Ableton stuff, mixing, setting up guitar rig setups and things like that. Also guitar lessons, hit me up on my website through the message, through the contact form. So I'd love to hear from you guys, and leave me a comment and subscribe if this was helpful. And if not, also leave me a comment so I know what you would like me to cover in future videos. So my name's Lucas. Take it easy, guys. I will catch you in the next video. Peace out.